Hello and welcome to episode 359 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. I'm your host, Pilar Orti, and this is an episode where I talk to Mark Kilby about how we are both using generative AI, in particular how he's using it, and then we go on to our monthly reading and listening and tool recommendations. But before we get into that conversation, which we recorded more than a month ago, I just thought, given the subject matter, it would be worth me just popping in for a couple of minutes to update you. First of all, I realized when editing that I didn't tell you that what we are discussing in the second half of this episode is the audio version of the email newsletter that I send every month and that I've been sending every month now for, not 10 years, but just. And you can sign up to that over at virtualnotdistant.com/newsletter, or indeed on that website, you can probably find the newsletter sign up form everywhere. And this just arrives once a month with recommendations and a digest of the Virtual Not Distant content. Now, relating to the topic of generative AI, well, as I said, we recorded over a month ago, which pretty much like when remote work was at full speed is like a lifetime ago for AI. So one of the things that's happened is GPT-4 has had a major update and is become GPT-4o. And that is now free, although there are some caps on messages, I believe, etc. It's good to remember that that is now free because we also talk about Llama from Meta being free. A couple of other things have happened. If you are into AI news, you might have heard that Scarlett Johansson is very upset with OpenAI because she reckons they've used something that sounds very much like her voice after she had gone through conversations with them about using her voice or not for one of the voices in OpenAI. So that's something that's been happening. Also, some top people in security at OpenAI have left recently. So I don't know. I just think these things might have affected Mark and I's conversations. Also, just one more thing. While I was working on the show notes, I was using both Claude and ChatGPT, which we talk about during the show, and I found it so frustrating. I think you have good and bad days with AI, and I was definitely having a bad day. I also use Perplexity, which Mark mentioned for research, and also I found it very limiting. So just to say something that Mark focuses on that we both actually talk about in the conversation is if you're interested in these tools, use them. Use them as experiments first. See what they can do, see what they can't do, see which one you warm to first. Anyway, I'd love to hear what you think. Pilar, Pilar, at virtualnotdistant.com, or you can head over to virtualnotdistant.com and send a message through the contact form. And now let's go back in time for about a month ago to hear the conversation with myself and Mark Kilby. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about how the world of work and our attitudes to work are changing. And listeners, finally I got it right, and I am so grateful that I have a guest who knows that sometimes I do know what I'm doing. My name is Pilar Orti, if we haven't met before, and this is another monthly episode recommendation for the month of May, although we are recording on the 24th of April. So given the topic as well that we're heading this with, things might have changed by then. So this is a guest with recommendations episode, but I'm just going to let the guest say hello to you before we kick off.
Hello, this is Mark Kilby. Pilar, thank you so much for having me on again.
Yes, you have been on the podcast quite a few times, and that is because you've been around the remote workspace for a while, definitely since I came into it. And of course, you have been focusing on Agile, distributed Agile, and you have a wonderful book that I recommend to listeners called From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams, Collaborate to Deliver, which you co-wrote with Joanna Rothman. And also now I believe you are a faculty member at the Modus Institute, and there you've always been someone who's always interested in developing others. So you've always done some kind of coaching and training. And there now at Modus, you are teaching collaboration, remote work, and better ways of working.
Happy to talk about the changes in work, remote work, AI, all of that stuff. And boy, do we have a lot of things to talk about today.
Yes, we do. We do. And it is true that you have been a regular on this show over the last, I don't know, I think we're getting soon to 10 years. And I think you've managed to at least be once a year, definitely.
I've been on once or twice, yeah.
And the other thing is that when I finished writing the Remote Workers Guide to Time Management, which I co-wrote with ChatGPT, and I finished that, and I sent it to you for feedback, and you gave me brilliant feedback, and I've already shared with listeners and the newsletter readers what you used to give that feedback, your framework. You also said near the end, oh, by the way, I've given it to Claude, and it's come up with this. And I thought, wow, Mark is also geeking out and trying things out. And it was so wonderful. So yes, listeners, we are going to be talking about generative AI for about 20-25 minutes. I know that some people are not interested in it. Some people also have a strong reaction against it. We're very, very early days. So if you don't want to listen to us talking about generative AI, skip ahead like 25 minutes and get to the recommendations, where we cover a much broader beast of audio, listening, reading, articles, recommendations. But meanwhile, let's have a think. So Mark, how have you been using generative AI? What have you been using it for?
Let me say a little bit for the listeners who are still listening to this part. I will say that I am skeptically curious of generative AI. Having an engineering background, I know enough to understand how it works and what it can and can't do. And I think there is some promising things, but it's also highly overhyped.
Yes.
So I am cautious. However, to get to your question, what I've been using it for, I have been using it for looking at contracts, helping me to give me ideas for articles. I don't really like the output of the art. It's still very kind of sterile in its style, because it's trying to produce an average response. I don't like average articles. I want great articles. So I put my spin on it, but I use it to help generate ideas. But a lot of it is helping me find gaps in things. So I'll feed it a bunch of different documents and say, okay, what patterns are you seeing and what are you not seeing that think should be in there? And that's been useful in a variety of, like I said, contracts or papers that I'm researching and things like that.
Wow, really interesting contracts. I'd never thought of that use. Okay, so that's interesting. And what are you using? So there's a few tools available. What are you using and what are you not using?
Because I put that as we were putting notes together. I'm not using ChatGPT as much. I actually had the paid
Plus.
The Plus version. And I just realized I wasn't using it as much because of what I was getting from some of the other tools. So I stopped that one. So I'm back to the freebie version. Facebook has Llama 3 out now. I haven't tried that one yet, but that's one I'm going to explore. I use Claude.ai quite a bit because it tends to hallucinate less, and it tends to give some more interesting answers, especially when I'm trying to explore a new area. I use Perplexity as well. I will say if you try that one and you see the references, check the references. Don't assume that those references are always correct. I've heard that from others as well.
So before we continue, Perplexity is a different kind of piece of tech, isn't it, to, for example, Claude and ChatGPT?
Yes.
It's more of a search engine, is that right?
More of a search engine, but it gives you references. But again, make sure that you're checking those references and what it's saying in the summary is actually in some of the articles and the things it mentions.
So how does it work? Because I haven't played with it yet. Do you ask it a question and then it gives you an answer with references?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So you might say something like, "How do I start a podcast?"
Mm-hmm.
And it'll give you general recommendations like you would get from Claude or from ChatGPT, but it will have usually 4 or 5 references, and you can ask for more references if you want. Or you can ask it to expand on the podcast, because you would ideally, you wouldn't just say, how do I start a podcast? You might say, how do I start a business podcast? Or how do I go after? And so you can keep asking the questions. If I wanted to be more casual, what would you recommend? And then it would give you more references. So, and who knows, Pilar, maybe some of your references will pop up there.
Well, I hope so. I actually have, what do they call them, a GPT for planning your podcast, where I fed the bot the text of my book, Plan Your Podcast. Yeah. I think that's how it's called. And then you can ask it questions. But funnily enough, I went in and I tried the thing to see what it said. And I asked it questions and it replied with answers that were not in the book at all. Like I asked it for examples of some podcasters and it gave me the typical ones, not the ones that I put in the book. So I had to go back and tell the bot, this here, my answers come first. Then if you can't find the answer in my in the database. So I think in a way, and we will go back to what else you're using in a second, in a way, the overhype that you said, I think also with the GPTs and everything, it's still not quite there, and we're still not quite there with it.
Yeah. Because I also, since I have a background in software, I pay attention to others who have been using it for code generation, and there's mixed results there. There was another article last week, would have been mid-April, by the time people listen to this podcast, of how Google, with their Gemini models, predicted a bunch of new chemical structures, and there's some debate on whether those are valid. So it goes on, the debates on this.
Yes. We have an interview with Jennifer Riggins talking about, again, code generation and how it's been used in the software world and stuff. So listeners can listen to that too. Okay, great. So anything else you are using? So Claude, we're mentioning Claude, ChatGPT, Perplexity. You mentioned Llama, which we haven't tried yet. What else?
Yeah. So another one that I've been using quite a bit is for note-taking. So there's many different options there. People are probably aware of Otter.ai, or they might be, if they're using Zoom, there's a way to get summaries there. I have been using a tool called Geek.ai. I find in most cases the summaries are a little off, but the notes are useful because it does a great job of saying, here's a topic, here's some things that were said, here's some actions. And I find it usually does a very good job of capturing those. So I tend to invite my Meet Geek note taker to meetings. I ask first because not everybody's comfortable with that. And I get a lot of value out of looking at the detailed notes, so I don't have to take as many notes.
So what's the difference? Did you say that the summaries are off, but it takes good notes?
What's the summaries are sometimes off. So, for instance, we don't have it here in this conversation, but if I had it in a lightly structured conversation like we have, it gets a little confused in the summary about what the purpose of the meeting was.
Right.
Yeah. But if you have a purpose and an agenda, it does a better job with the summary. So if the meeting is very structured, it does a better job with the summary. If there's just conversational kind of gathering, the summary is usually rubbish. So it's like, oh, well, they talked about the temperature today. It's like, no, that was not the purpose of the call, but yeah.
Yeah. And notes, it just writes down that notes. This was said, this action was.
Yeah. It will usually get the speaker correct, but not always. I find the built-in meeting note takers do a better job because it's tied into, like Zoom, for instance, does a much better job of saying, Pilar said this and Mark said that. Yeah, so I think we're going to see more of that kind of application where it's, again, gathering live information and summarizing and capturing actions and ideas.
Anything else?
The only other thing is I do a little bit with graphics because I have no graphical skills.
Yeah.
I do not have your artistic skills.
Doodles.
So I was using DALL-E out of the ChatGPT Plus account, but I found a better tool, which is free, designer.microsoft.com. If you go there, you can say, I want a picture of a professional podcast booth with two people in there having a conversation, and then it'll produce a few different images for you, where DALL-E will give you one to work with. This one produces a few different ones and say, oh, I want to iterate on this one. And so you can tell it, oh, I want to change this. I want to make it more casual. I want to make it more cartoon-like. And it'll give you multiple options again, which is nice.
I do remember that coming out, but I haven't played with it. On
Yeah.
images, in case you're interested and in case listeners are interested. So I've been editing in GPT Plus with DALL-E and had very fun results trying to get it to change things. And we'll go into where you can find out more about that later. But also you might be interested, if you haven't seen yet, Llama. So Llama 3, I think, or maybe it's the next one, I don't know, is the Facebook AI.
Yep.
And as I understand, you can go to meta.ai and through Facebook you can sign in. It's free. Not everywhere. It's not in the UK at the moment. I've seen a video, which I might dig out for listeners, of someone generating the images, and it really does your head in as you're prompting it. So as you're saying, I want an image of a cat, it will come up with a cat, drinking, then it changes to a cat drinking, in a forest, then it brings the forest up. So you can see the engine going at 100 miles an hour, creating these things in front of you.
Oh, wow.
So it's good and bad. I mean, you can do your head in, but it just shows it is crazy. So you might have some, if you want to go into Facebook to play with your GenAI. Anyway, that's... I find, Mark, when you were saying earlier about being skeptical and what did you say? What was the term you use?
I'm skeptically curious.
Yes, when you said you were skeptically curious. Yeah. For me, I'm still trying. I mean, I've played with GPT Plus. I use it a lot. I use it almost every day. I finish my fiction writing sessions by giving the text and getting feedback, which I take with a big pinch of salt. But it does help me, and sometimes it's got me unstuck from certain things. I went back to Claude after you prompted or you told me you were using it, and I like the quality of the prose a lot. So I have to say I use it for show notes for this, for blog posts for this show, for 21st Century Work Life. I edit it a bit, but not a lot, because I like the quality. What I have found is that if I feed it the whole transcript, it comes out with something that's okay. But if I feed it bit by bit of the transcript, it gives actually quite a nice quality summary. So it goes into more detail. Well,
and another thing which I found better results with Claude was I do some career coaching as well. So having people feed their resume and a job description into Claude, say, how would you change this resume to better fit this job description? And I got much better results. And then I could also talk to it and say, what do you think is missing from this resume that's being asked for and emphasized in the job description? And you can get some descriptions and suggestions that way as well. You can do that really with any generative AI, but I thought the quality of where the models are now, which can certainly change in a month or two with these models. But right now, Claude seems to do a very nice job of that. And so I've coached people on how to use Claude for that.
And I think you're making another great point, which we must not forget. And it's that pretty much like when adopting remote work, this takes time. It takes time. And we're very early on. I mean, I play with the idea of writing a book about how to use generative AI now for writing a nonfiction, and I think, is it worth it? Because everything's going to change so much. Yeah. But this fact of each tool is good for a different thing. Each person connects differently with different tools, and you need the time, which not everyone has, to really experiment and understand. Because it's. I think it's also about your connection with the tool as well. I'll go back to your point in a second, but. Today, I wrote a blog post, and someone actually, April Doty, commented on something I said about when I'm interacting with ChatGPT a lot of the time and in asking questions and trying to get to an answer that's useful, which doesn't always happen. It's like digging into my subconscious as well, because it's getting something out of me that I can't get out on my own. So as well as using it to generate and give me things, the interaction is helping me to bring out things from myself. I wonder, I think that's very useful.
Well, yeah, it's interesting you said that because Claude was one of the first models that had the large storage space offered. And that's when I fed my book, From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams, into it. And I was asking it questions. I said, from what you know about remote, what do you see that's different in the book? What do you see that's missing in the book? And it was interesting to have that conversation with the generative AI to explore the book. It's like, oh, maybe I should write a second one now after that.
Yes. So you were saying, and I'm sure listeners are interested in this, that you are using, you're working out how to best use Claude for preparing resumes, cover letters, and you're coaching people in how to do this. And you do have an article that I really enjoyed on your newsletter, differability.works, and it's about job fishing with AI. I mean, I like the term job fishing rather than job hunting. Why are you using that term? I think that's funny.
So with hunting, so I come from the South in the United States. So hunting and fishing are big here. With hunting, you're picking up on a trail. You're trying to set a certain environment. With fishing, you're dropping a line and hoping something bites. And that's seemed like a better metaphor for looking for a job these days, because there's so many people out there looking for jobs, and they get so many different suggestions. And what I saw from using AI is, well, here's how you could incorporate some of those suggestions but not work so hard. If some of that advice is loaded into the AI, which it is, because they've scraped the internet,
yes,
you could say, all right, give me some ways to change my cover letter for this particular job, or give me some ideas of where I'm a little bit weak compared to the job description, but maybe I could emphasize some things. And what I found, similar to what you said, Pilar, was sometimes it'll remind me of, oh, I forgot about emphasizing this, especially if I know people who've applied for 200, 300, 400 jobs over the last couple months. And you do that many applications and everything gets blurry. So if you've got a tool like this to help you remember, oh, I should emphasize that project I did on this job because it's very closely related to what they're asking for. So just using it to remind you of those things when you're in the stress of a job hunt or job fishing, it's good to have a tool like that.
And in a way, reading through your post, I was reminded that maybe it's leveling the field a bit, because tech has been used for a while for the people recruiting to help them sift through all the applications.
Yeah. And so that's why I emphasized in the articles, like, they've got this tech for applicant tracking systems, which are filtering a bunch of people out. Make sure you don't get filtered out.
Yeah, it's helping in that way. I love that. Yes. Good. Is there anything else you want to say about what you've been looking around with, either the job fishing or anything else you've got? Yeah, how are you finding it?
So it's interesting because I'm working with people who mostly in tech, and so that's had a lot of layoffs lately. It is beyond a full-time job for most people. So I think the more you can kind of map out a process for yourself, and the more you can use tools like this to make it easier or to automate, is good. But just remember, it's your story. You still have to tell your narrative around how you're the best fit for the job. And it can be overwhelming with the job hunt, as well as trying to keep up with all these different technologies, because AI is changing. I'll put it this way: I probably keep up with 3 or 4 different AI newsletters, and that's tough because the different things they bring up all the time, and you have to say, all right, is this really something that's important, or is this just more hype? And I do that because I think it will be important to many of us down the road. It just there's just so much hype in some of the news we hear. You have to be careful, and that's what I try to help people understand. It's like, all right, here's the useful parts that you can get out of this, especially for job fishing.
Yes, I mean it's very tempting. I can see lots of again, like you, lots of consultants whose part of their job is to understand how all of this works and to be on top of things so that not everyone has to. And then you can help people filter down and look through. I think this is really important for anyone who has either resisted looking at the tools or who wants to try all of them. I think it's this thing of have a look and see if anything is useful, but don't attempt to do everything because you're just going to, especially now, you're just going to go crazy.
No.
Yeah.
It's better to see, do I have a particular need? Do I have a particular problem, something I don't like doing? Like I don't like dealing with contracts. So that's why I started saying, I'm going to feed some contracts in and see what it can tell me. And it had some useful ideas.
Yeah.
Yes, I still would say, pass it by, your attorney. But if you've done a lot of contracting, it could be a handy tool. I'll put it this way. I think AI is going to be part of our 21st century work life. I mean, it already is. And I think it's going to be more so. So just try to experiment where it's useful for you.
Yeah, nice. And so have you found that you said it saves you time? Do you think it feeds your writing in other ways? It's helping you with some ideas. It's helping you to refine them.
It's helping me. So on the idea side, I don't have the problem. I usually have way more ideas than I can write up. I know you know that problem. It's really trying to save time in other areas so that I can have more time to write. So for administrative tasks, I don't like, or something that I know I waste a lot of time because I don't want to do it. That's where I'm sitting there going, can I use one of these AI tools for this? And is it secure enough? Is it private enough that I feel comfortable feeding information, especially if it's something about my business or personal? Do I feel comfortable doing that?
That's a good point, which we haven't touched upon, which is the privacy or not of these tools. And I know you've got to, you make your decision. I mean, I make sure I don't put anything, well, I don't know. I put a lot of things in. I know that it's going to be used. I'm fine with ChatGPT. I've ticked that it can use it for training. I know Claude uses it, I think, or I don't know if you can check it out or not.
Claude right now has a better user agreement than some of the others, which is another reason I like using Claude. But yeah, you can say, no, I don't.
I mean, I open everything because I'm using everyone else's. So I'm very happy to give. I mean, I'm sure I've contributed already loads through the internet. Before we start thinking about moving on to the recommendations, though, I think we haven't mentioned Gemini, which is the Google one. Have you had a look?
I have not had a chance to explore it yet. With some things I'm hearing about Gemini, it's like, okay, I need to spend some time with Gemini.
So I used it for one thing. I can't remember what it was. And while Claude and ChatGPT gave me some nice, probably for a podcast show notes, well, ChatGPT and Claude gave me some nice narrative. Gemini gave me bullet points. And I thought, okay, I know you now. If I need bullet points, I might come to you. But for now, I'm going to forget about it. And I use the free version as well. So I think I'll stick with this. I'm very tempted by Llama, but the fact that you have to go into Facebook and the fact that it's wonderfully going to be free. And we know that Facebook free means give us your stuff and we'll make money from it. I think there's still, for me, I don't know about you, Mark, I'm still struggling with, I'm using the tools, but pretty much like sometimes I buy products from companies that I'm a bit like, are your practices ethical? I'm using the tools knowing that things could happen, that maybe some of the companies could be a little bit more ethical in how they're approaching and how they want to move forward. For me, it's a real tension all the time. I'm still using them, but I think that there is that side as well.
And being that I am a bit of a tool geek, I'm always looking at new tools, but I'm also looking at those issues as well. It's like, how safe is it to put part of my business or part of my client's business in this space? So I'm always looking at other tools, not only for what features they have, but is this a more secure option? Is it a more private option for for the people that I work with.
There's all that. So all of that to be looking at as well.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say around this? Anything we've missed before we move on to the recommendations?
It's changed all the time, so I'm sure you'll have another podcast about it.
Oh yes, I'll bore everyone with it. I did think of turning my newsletter "Spiraling Creativity" into a podcast, but I'm going to wait. So before we close, yes, I had something very quick just to talk about Google's new terms and conditions, which yes, I do read these emails that I get. This point where it says under generative AI terms, it says we're moving our existing generative AI additional terms to our main terms of service and adding other AI-related clarifications. For example, we won't claim ownership over original content generated by our AI-powered services. Because, of course, there is especially I looked into the copyright thing and I did massage a lot what ChatGPT gave me. But I think this is very interesting, very clear. When you're not interested, it's still in your terms and conditions now. So
Yeah. Well, and some would probably even debate the term original content from an AI.
Well, it is. I mean,
derivative. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think anyone worried about the content generated being a copy of someone else's, you can Google it. I think Google sentences, and it's worth doing because you never know. Sometimes also by chance, it might give you like a sentence that someone said, and then you don't know. So it's always, these are all things that we need to stay on top of and just keep checking in.
Well, I look at it this way. It's like any tool that we use. We've got to know where it works well, where it doesn't, and what are some safety precautions we have to set up.
So if you want to find out more about what Mark is doing, which is not always about AI, is it? Your website is much more holistic. What's your website? What's your newsletter about?
The newsletter, differability.works, is really about how to work differently. I've been writing about remote work for years, but it's not the only thing that I do to explore different ways of working. So as I started writing more about AI, I included it there. As I started looking at what are some alternatives when you get a little bit older and you might be thinking about career pivots and things like that. So there'll be things about career pivots and maybe a little bit about sabbaticals coming up and just different things to think about in your own 21st century work life, to put it that way.
Wonderful. Listeners, I'm subscribed and I love it. And you should subscribe to, or at least check it out. See if it's for you. Differability.works. I am blogging at Spiraling Creativity. I think it's still .substack.com. I'll stick the link in the show notes. And there it's a mixture. It's another kind of work. It's my exploration of different artistic projects, which include writing and drawing and using GenAI as well. But again, it's not the only thing I talk about, but 2/3 of the content. Wonderful. So let's get on to our recommendations. So I will just start. I will remind people that you have an article called Job Fishing with AI, and we'll stick the link in the show notes. That's differability.works. Why don't I start just because I have a few articles. So I've got quite a few. I'll very quickly just tell you about it. So mine are really about remote work this month. So one is by Samit Moghe, who's been on the show, of course, because I don't know why, of course. I think, of course, because, of course, I'm recommending it from someone who's been on the show. And it's over at asyncagile.org. And it's the wrong kind of async. And it's all about asynchronous communication. Samit has a book, I think it was called the Async First Playbook. And I like this quote, and so it summarizes in a way. It's don't forget that async first is not async only. It's about making conscious trade-offs when choosing a communication pattern. And the article is around those lines. It's broader than that, but I think it's a really good reminder. I don't want everyone to get lost now with all the generative AI and about the fact that asynchronous communication for me is the basis of remote work. And it's one of the most difficult things for some people to get used to. And then on the flip side of that, I'll let you go, Mark, because this is a nice contrast. It's actually an article I came across. It's a bit like a case study, but this is from January the 5th, 2024. So some listeners might have come across it. Plants and bookcases in living rooms and blank walls out. How your Zoom background can make you seem more competent. And I leave. You're okay. I'm not, because listeners, Mark has
mine's messy.
Yeah, but you have a bookcase. I can see some books.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently that makes you seem more competent than plain background like my booth.
And then my networking equipment in the middle of the.
Oh, yes. More or less competent then. So have a read, listeners, and it'd be lovely to know what you think. And I will, now that I remember, give you my email address, pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. Mark, what have you got?
So this was earlier in April, but you could not miss this title, and it's from Inc. magazine, Inc.com. Here we are 4 years after the pandemic, and 75% of leaders are still terrible at remote work. So for those who may not get a chance to read it, it's not necessarily bashing the leaders, but talking about some of the challenges people faced during the pandemic, all the uncertainty, and how leaders were suddenly thrust into this new world of work while trying to keep things working. And that's not a great learning environment for anybody. And so that's part of what they talk about in the article. There's far more in there. But if you're curious how leaders are doing with this, it's a great read.
That is the point that I think not everyone is getting, and it's that the organizational leaders as well during the pandemic, they weren't into how to do remote work because they were panicking and trying to keep the businesses going. And a lot of what they were doing was real-time communication on online meetings. So from that point of view, it's really understandable that some organizations have said, no, this didn't work. It's not going to work. Let's go back to how it was, more or less. And it's that thing that I've always seen, the people who are making those decisions just have never experienced remote work as we know and love.
Yeah. And in general, humans have a hard time with change when they're not prepared for it. And this was certainly a case study in that. So does it mean that remote work will go away? No, I don't think so. But I think we're going to see it shrink a little bit as the return to office mandate kind of gets turned up to 11. I think we're going to see more days in office than out of office as we go through 2024, but we'll see.
We'll see. Thank you for that. I'd missed that article, so it's good to see. And then I just wanted to point listeners to a section of GitLab's handbook. Listeners, if you haven't seen it, GitLab, of course, is like a 2,000-person company, isn't it?
And that handbook has a lot in it.
Yes, and the handbook is like, if you're looking for anything, there's loads of sections. You can probably find something in there, but again, don't try to read all of it. But it's got an interesting section that I hadn't come across of the 10 models of remote and hybrid work. So it's just different ways of looking at the different setups. So I think it's an interesting read. Oh, one more. So, and my final one is it's not an article, it's a newsletter, and also, of course, a blog site. It's also over on Substack, but it's Ethan Mollick's newsletter on AI. And he is a professor in a US university. I can't remember which one. So he's an educator. And he's a very interesting guy as well, because he has, if anything's being released early, he has a look into it. It's for people who really want to understand what's going on and who are prepared to go into a good read. It's dense. And sometimes I'm like, oh, too much detail, I can't read it. Yeah. But if you are interested in it, if you're interested in understanding how this works and what are some of the ways in which it's being used, I think it's really interesting. It's oneusefulthing.org. Have you read it, Mark? Have you come across it?
I have not come across that one, so I'm looking forward to it.
He's got a book out, which I haven't read yet, and I can't remember the name. So, which takes us into books. And before we move on to all the other recommendations that we've got, if you haven't read Mark Kilby and Joanna Rothman's book, From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams, Collaborate to Deliver, then do, even if you're not an agile and software development team, because it's really enjoyable handbook. I still remember it. And I have recommended it before. So yes, check it out. It's great. It really is. It comes from people who really, truly understand collaboration. And of course agile, and of course remote, but I think the collaboration is the important thing in that book.
Johanna and I, as we wrote that book as a distributed team, we figured out between the two of us, we probably have 50 years of working with collaborative remote teams. So we've seen quite a bit, and a lot of it's in that book.
Great. So let's go to the next one, Mark. What have you got for us? You've got two. Let's go to your first one.
Yeah, so also have the book, which just came out a few months ago by Jim Benson, The Collaboration Equation. The one thing I like about Jim's book is where Johanna and I did not specifically recommend a framework. We actually try to avoid a framework because in the agile world, the agile project management space, there are a ton of frameworks, and we didn't want to throw another one in the mix. But we tried to give some principles and a lot of examples of here's some things to think about. The thing about Jim's book is he gives you more thinking tools on if you're building a team, if you're building an organization, here's some tools to talk about communication. Here's some tools to think about what your process is and how you might improve it. And also, how do you set continuous improvement up as a regular thing, as a habit almost within your team and your organization? And so the two books go very well together. As a matter of fact, Jim and I have built a class on those two books, and just a lot of great ideas in there. If you've got teams that are struggling, whether they're in person, hybrid, remote, it will work for any of those.
We will come back to the cause, but just in case anyone drops off at some point, successful remote work teams, we will stick the link in the show notes so you can have a look at that. I was thinking that actually, if I were to set up Virtual Not Distant again and start my program of transitioning to remote for teams and for managers, I think I would start with the basics of collaboration as foundation modules, and how to structure the work, how to talk. I love that, how to talk about the work, because that is what's missing. And you have to, the good thing about going remote is you have to talk about that. But I think I missed the fact that there was a big gap in how to talk about that. So I think the fact that these books go together, it sounds like they're perfect mix.
And I think that's really a theme with some of the other recommendations here, because I was looking at Sumit's article on the wrong kind of async, and even he talks about it's important to be transparent. It's important to have a process, and a process that everybody understands. So that's some of those foundational elements of collaboration.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing about your next one, because I've got one that is completely like nothing to do with remote work, but it's Austin Kleon, and I think anyone who writes or does art or anything will know him. He wrote Still Like an Artist, Show Your Work. And he's got this one, which is Do the Work. And this one is really about getting unstuck. Like, you've got Still Like an Artist, which is all about like the ideas and how to develop your practice. Then he's got Show the Work, which is about how you basically work out loud, but from an artist point of view. But of course, there's all that like difficult bit in the middle, which is not glamorous, which is hard. And so this is, if you like short, snappy, very practical, but also very well written, books. This is one, and also he draws, and he's an artist, as in a fine artist kind of thing. So there's also lots of visual things to look at. So it's good. I read it on the Kindle, and I still enjoy the visuals. So it's really well put together. So Austin Kleon's do the work.
That might go on my Kindle today.
Ah, yes. That's a nice thing, isn't it, about the Kindle? It's like instant download.
I carry my library with me in one device.
I know. Nice. It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. Hi, these times we live in. So what's your last recommendation for the book section, Mark?
Yeah, so this one's a little bit different. I'm still reading it, but I'm really it's one of those books where it's an easy read, but it makes you pause and think a little bit. So I'm kind of like thinking about some of the things in the book. But the book is by Arthur C. Brooks, and it's called From Strength to Strength, Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life. Yes, I have it here in front of me.
Wow.
And for somebody who's doing also a little bit of career coaching, and definitely in the second half of life, I'm really enjoying this book because he talks a little bit about neuroscience and neuroplasticity and how our brain changes over time and how our skills might shift a little bit over time because of that, and some of our strengths, and how to pay attention to that and how to maybe leverage that into some new opportunities. I've really enjoyed this, and I look forward to slowly savoring the book.
Well, I think I need to check it out to understand what's going on with me. And to maybe slow down a bit while I absorb what's happening around me. Now, did you say earlier you had a book that you might recommend, but you hadn't read yet? Do you?
Yeah, I hadn't read yet. It's been put out by a friend of mine, Alex Pukinskis. I've known Alex for several years. We've worked together. And he has a new book called Remotely Productive, Leading Better Online Meetings and Workshops. Now, Alex and I have very similar training in facilitation, and he's also done quite a bit with remote. And just from what I saw from the outline, I think he's going to have some nice guidelines and tips. If you're still working remotely or you're in a hybrid situation, he'll have some good tips for you. That book will be coming out the end of April. So for those listening, it's probably out now. It is called Remotely Productive, Leading Better Online Meetings and Workshops.
Let's go on to the audio, which I think I said this in a previous recommendations episode with Maya, that I listen mostly to podcasts about writing and AI. So, well, we can give. I've recommended here Hard Fork before, which is about technology. Yes, do you listen to it?
Every Friday when it comes out. I don't miss it. It's a great. It's very informative, but they're funny. It's very light. So,
well, you say it's light. I think it's so thorough.
Yes.
So what I like about it is very funny. Yeah. You're right. They don't take themselves seriously. I think that's where the lightness comes from, especially not the Kevin, the other one. He's so funny.
Yeah.
They're very goofy. If you like goofy humor, perfect. I'm very bright. But what I really like about them is that they always make me see things differently. You know, they say, yeah, we believe this, but why would someone believe the opposite? And that is very, very important, because in order to understand what's going on, we need that. And it's not just about AI, it's about technology and technology and society. They had Jonathan Haidt, I think is his name, come in and talk about the effect of social media on young people, things like that as well. So if you're into, and it was a very good piece. There's also the Artificial Intelligence Show, which is more about news about AI. That is very AI. Mm-hmm. And that if you want to know what's going on week by week, listen to that. But beyond that, I wanted to recommend a show that I haven't recommended for a while, just again, because I haven't been listening to it as much, but it's Chase Warrington's About Abroad. And in particular, the episode from the 16th of April, 2024. It's called Building Airbnb's Live and Work Anywhere program and Moving Abroad and Corporate Nomadism. And what I like about this is that Chase and the guest, because it really is a conversation at the beginning, and I heard a lot about Chase that I didn't know, and I loved it. is they first talk about the experience of moving around and the experience with the surroundings and experiencing not necessarily nomadism, but moving from place to place. And then the guests talk about being a nomad while holding a 9-to-5 job and how that felt versus then setting up as his own self, basically. And I think that's really important to remind ourselves, well, we know that there's no one way of being remote. There is actually not one way of being abroad to the theme of the show, because the show is really about that. It's about people who've moved abroad and who live these different lifestyles. So About Abroad is the podcast, and the episode is the episode from 16th April 2024. But if you have never listened to that show, do. Chase is a very, very good host. And so what have we got from you? Oh, we have a couple.
Wow. you reminded me of a couple of others as you were talking, so I popped them in our list here real quick. So another thing that I've been looking at as I think about the future work is the idea of toxicity. And we've actually had a lot of conversations and a new class actually at Modus Institute on this one. But this one from the Anxious Achiever podcast came out just mid-April. I don't remember the exact date, but the title is, Are You and Your Employer in an Abusive Relationship? While it sounds like a heavy topic, there are some really good things for you to think about if you find yourself in difficult situations. They have some interesting things to consider about, do you tend to seek out these kinds of difficult relationships in work and don't realize it? I would say there's some useful questions they pose in that podcast that it's worth a listen.
Nice. The podcast is The Anxious Achiever, and Are You and Your Employer in an Abusive Relationship is the episode. Wonderful. I think that is super useful, especially if you work, well, I would say, well, not especially if you work remotely. Sorry, I've just thought that actually if you have to go into the office every day, you probably need to tackle this even more.
Yeah, you can have difficult working relationships anywhere. Yeah, it doesn't matter. So the podcast is great. I listen to almost every one of those episodes, but that one I wanted to point out. So
yes, excellent.
And the other one I wanted to mention, since we talked about collaboration, is I completely forgot about a podcast I'm on. It's like, okay, I should mention this one, called Collaborwalkie. So this is from some of the people at Modus Institute. So you'll hear Jim Benson, you'll hear me, you'll hear others. We're getting all kinds of guests lined up to talk about different places where they've had successful collaborations, where they've struggled with collaboration. We'll talk about the toxic waste ideas or dealing with toxic relationships. So we've got all kinds of things lined up. There's already 7 or 8 podcasts out there now, but it's all about collaboration and how to improve.
So you're a podcast co-host, and I find out about it on the show. Okay, so this is why you have to have recordings.
And this is why I'm terrible at promoting.
I can't believe it. I'm going to check that out. It's going to go on my queue. And at some point, you're going to come on Adventures in Podcasting to tell me about the difference between being a host and a guest and how it feels. That would be really fun.
To do that.
So Collaborwalkie, of course, it comes from Jabberwocky, I imagine.
Yes.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. So Collaborwalkie, a podcast on collaboration. I can't wait to hear that. I've got one last recommendation, which I haven't listened to. I'm going to be completely transparent, but I got a message through our website. And it was a lovely message. It was completely relevant. It was actually very well worded. It wasn't like a lot of the stuff that comes through. And it's called Not the 9 to 5. And it's a podcast for freelancers. And I just checked out the audio and what the host sounded like to make sure that it, it had potential. So I haven't listened to any of the episodes yet, but it's actually two British actresses who are hosting it. I know one of them is a voiceover and the other, I think, has a theatre company. So I'm like thinking of my younger, that's what I would have done if they've been podcasting. And it's about freelancing. So I thought that a lot of our listeners probably might be interested in it. So it's called Not the 9 to 5, which I think is a fabulous title.
That is interesting.
And it's connected, talking about connections, to the episode on About Abroad, where they really talk about how it's not, remote work really is not about location as much as different ways of working, and the difference between, once you have location independence, then you tend to seek time independence. And this is when we see that remote work is not possible everywhere in the best place, because we can't all be time independent in our work. Before we wrap up, we've got a recommended course, which we don't often have. So, Mark, tell us the title of the course and then what it's covering. You've already teased us about it.
I teased a little bit about it, yes. So this is the course that Jim Benson and I did together called Successful Distributed Teams. It's over at Modus Institute, where both Jim and I are faculty. And as I mentioned, it blends the ideas from my book, From Chaos to Successful Distributed Agile Teams, and Jim's book on the collaboration equation, about how you can collaborate anywhere. So we have concepts from both books and some new ideas as well, like how do you determine when the teams are drifting apart on certain things, like their communication plan, or how they collaborate, or how they follow their work process. And so this course will guide you through that and give you some ideas and templates.
And it's a self-paced course with videos and...
It's a self-paced course with videos. Jim and I are setting up some regular monthly calls. We haven't done that yet, but those should be set up soon, so that you can work with Jim and I and talk about your particular situation. We have done one sort of live workshop. We might have another one of those in the fall. We haven't set that up yet.
Excellent. Great. So, listeners, I will stick the link in the show notes, but if you want to Google modusinstitute.com, you can find the course, and under the courses tab, it will be there.
Did we want to talk about tools briefly?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So we also have recommended tools.
Yeah, because I did warn you, I am a tool geek.
Yes.
So I had told Pilar about a new one I found called Beeper. So for those of you from the 80s and 90s, yes, it's sort of that idea. But what Beeper does is it pulls together all your different communication platforms. So think Slack, WhatsApp, and it coordinates all the direct messages. So if you want to make sure you don't miss a direct message and you can't remember who is on what platform, take a look at beeper.com. The reason I decided to try it is just as I was sitting there deciding, they got acquired by Automatic.
Woo!
And if you don't know Automatic does WordPress, and they have
Tumblr.
They have a long history, and they've been buying interesting apps to add to their ecosystem. And so Beeper is now part of that. So I've been trying it, and it's been fun to catch a conversation on WhatsApp, and then another on Slack, and then another in LinkedIn. And it's like, I don't have to flip screens all the time. I just have this one screen. So that's been nice.
Yeah, it reminds me of email, actually, if you have email notifications turned on, then and the email client ends up being the place where everything gathers, but then you have to go to the platforms. So can you reply to those messages from Beeper?
Yes.
You can.
Yeah, you can also reply. So you don't have to go into these different apps. You can just jump right into the conversation.
You've reminded me of so his name was Paolo, and I met him when I first met my husband, and he was in Amsterdam, and he had a platform that did that. Mm-hmm. But when we had MSN Messenger, mm-hmm. and all of that, and he made loads of money very quickly. Yeah, because when instant messaging apps were big, there was just some apps that tied those together. I remember those. Yeah, so that's very good. I think that will solve lots of people's problems. Small problem, but yeah.
Yeah, and since we've talked about async, I wanted to bring up one more that just came back, and you've actually seen this one, Volley. The Volley app.
Oh, yes, you're right. I thought of you.
So Volley kind of launched in the middle of the pandemic, and it was popular for a while, and then they actually went out of business, but they've now been acquired, they're back. And what Volley is an asynchronous messaging tool. So you can use video, you can use audio, you can use text, and it doesn't push a bunch of notifications at you. You go into the tool when you're ready and you respond. So if you want to practice some asynchronous messaging, I will put a Volley link on my website. So if people want to send me a Volley message and try it out for asynchronous messaging, they're welcome to do so.
Excellent. I love that. We will stick that in the show notes. Remember to send it to me or put it in the Google Doc, actually. Put it in the Google Doc. That's where we will gather everything. Mark, that's been fantastic. Thank you very much. I've taken some things that I need to check out now just because I don't have enough input.
I know I'm going to be busy loading up my Kindle and my podcast app. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Listeners, you can find out more about Mark over at markkilby.com. So there you can link to Differability, the newsletter, or find it at differability.works. Mark, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Pilar. Thank you.
A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work Life podcast. We know there are many other shows for you to choose from. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Orti. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy. Hello and welcome to another episode of the 21st Century Work Life podcast, where we talk about the world of work and, oh God, I keep getting this wrong. I got it wrong again yesterday. Let me do it again. After how many years? Right, I'm going.